Okay, let's dive in. Singapore's general election, May 3rd, 2025, it ended with a pretty big win for the People's Action Party, the PAP. A landslide, people are calling it.
Yeah, a landslide is definitely the word being used. So what we want to do in this deep dive is, well, try and unpack why. What were the key things behind that result?
Right, we've got news reports, some analysis pieces, even a voter survey to draw on.
Exactly. We're aiming to give you, the listener, a really clear picture of what was driving voters' choices this time around.
And you can't ignore the backdrop, can you? Lots of global instability, economic worries. That's got to be part of the story.
Oh, absolutely. That context is crucial. And we'll also look at the opposition parties, how they fared and all this.
Good point. It's not just about the PAP win, but the whole political picture.
Precisely. So should we start with the numbers? What does this landslide actually look like?
Yeah, let's get specific. What were the vote percentages, the seats?
Okay, so the PAP pulled in 65.57% of the popular vote. That's quite a chunk.
65.57. And seats.
That translated into winning 87 out of the 97 seats in Parliament, a very solid majority.
Wow, 87 out of 97. That really is commanding. And compared to the last election, was this a big jump?
It was a noticeable swing, yeah. Last time, back in the previous election, they got 61.24%, so definitely an increase in support.
And this is Prime Minister Lawrence Wong's first election leading the party, right?
That's right. His first test as PM at the ballot box, and he walked away with a very clear mandate from voters.
Okay, a strong mandate. So what pushed things this way? What were the big drivers? Our sources seem to point towards, well, global issues first.
Yeah, that seems to be a really big one. Fears of global instability. That phrase comes up quite a bit in the analyses we looked at.
You can see why, though. Things feel pretty uncertain out there. Trade wars, conflicts.
Exactly. And PM Wong, he actually specifically asked for that strong mandate because of these global economic uncertainties. He mentioned potential U.S. tariffs, things like that.
Ah, okay. So he framed it as needing a strong hand to navigate tricky international waters.
Pretty much. And that message seems to have hit home for people worried about how all that global stuff might affect Singapore.
Which makes sense. When the world feels shaky, maybe you look for something solid closer to home.
That's a good way to put it. And it wasn't just vague global fears either. There were very real, very domestic concerns too, weren't there?
Definitely. The cost of living, the economy right here in Singapore, those were huge, according to our sources.
Absolutely dominant concerns for voters. And if you look at some of the economic analysis, like from the MRO blog, they point out how vulnerable Singapore's open economy is to global shifts, like U.S. protectionism.
So those global worries kind of fed into the local economic anxiety, made it feel more immediate.
I think so, yeah. It's like a double whammy, external threats potentially making internal problems like the cost of living even worse.
Okay, so global fears, local economic pain.
Yeah.
But there's another piece too, right? Trust in the PAP itself.
Yes, definitely. Several sources talked about a flight to safety, voters basically endorsing the party they know.
A flight to safety. That's telling, isn't it? Prioritizing the familiar when things feel uncertain.
It suggests exactly that. And it seems that trust extended to the new leadership team, too, PM Wong and the 4G leaders.
People felt they were a safe pair of hands.
Seems like it. And you had Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong also talking about needing cooperation to handle global changes, reinforcing that message of experience, maybe.
It's interesting, too. Even the SDP chairman kind of acknowledged this, didn't he? Attributing it to a constant drumbeat of crisis.
Yeah, Paul Tambia said that. It suggests even the opposition recognized that desire for stability was a really powerful force in this election.
So a strong sense that voters wanted experience and stability above all else right now.
That seems to be the core message coming through, yes.
Okay, let's pivot to the opposition then. The Workers' Party, they're usually seen as the main opposition force. How did they do?
Well, the WP, they held on to their ground, they kept their 10 seats, and they also got both the non-constituency MP spots.
So no losses in terms of seats they already held. That's something.
Yeah. It is. They maintained their presence, but their main argument, about needing a more balanced parliament for better checks and balances.
Yeah, what about it?
It seems that didn't really gain much wider traction this time. They didn't manage to win more seats beyond their existing strongholds.
So they held the line, but didn't advance much. What are the analysts saying about that? What's next for the WP?
Well, The thinking seems to be they need to find a way to break out of those strongholds, focus on winning more seats outright in the future, maybe even position themselves more clearly as a potential alternative government down the line.
Right. Holding steady isn't quite the same as building momentum, is it?
Exactly. It raises questions about how they broaden their appeal.
And what about the other opposition parties, the smaller ones? Sounds like it was a tough election for them.
Very tough. Basically, none of them won any seats. No NCMP spots either.
Really? None at all?
No. And worse, quite a few of their candidates actually lost their election deposits.
Ouch. That really signals a lack of significant support, doesn't it?
It does. It means they didn't even get, 1/8 of the votes in the constituencies they contested.
Yeah, something like that. So what does that mean for the bigger political picture if the smaller parties are struggling so much?
Well, it feeds into this idea. Some analysts are talking about a 1.5 party system.
1.5, meaning?
Meaning you have the PPP as the dominant one and the Workers' Party as the half, the main, but much smaller opposition. The space for anyone else seems to be shrinking.
Okay, that's a pretty stark assessment. Consolidation of the political landscape, maybe?
It looks a bit like that, yeah.
Let's bring it back to the voter-specific concerns. We mentioned cost of living and the economy. That JOM survey you mentioned earlier had some specifics, right?
It really did. It found that cost of living and housing were way ahead of any other issues for Singaporeans, far more than things like immigration or social issues.
Just completely dominating people's thoughts.
Pretty much. And get this, only 28% of the people they surveyed said they could live comfortably.
Wow, only 28%. So over 70% are feeling squeezed to some extent.
That's what it suggests. A big majority feeling financial pressure. That's bound to influence how people vote, isn't it?
Absolutely. Did the survey show if certain groups were feeling it more than others?
Yeah, interestingly, the 45 to 54 age group seemed particularly worried about these bread and butter issues, as the survey called them.
The sandwich generation, maybe? Supporting kids and older parents?
That could well be it. They also reported being less satisfied overall with the government, the economy, their own finances. They seem to be feeling the pinch most acutely.
Right. So while those big global anxieties were there, these really tangible everyday money worries were front and center for a lot of voters.
Definitely. And the PAP knew this, of course. How did they handle it in the campaign?
Well, they made a point of highlighting the billions they'd already spent on cost of living support measures.
Right, reminding people of past actions.
Yeah. And PM Wong also promised they'd redouble efforts on these issues going forward, addressing the concerns head on.
So acknowledging the problem and promising continued action seems like that message landed well enough.
Apparently so. What about campaign strategy itself? Any specific moves that stood out?
Well, the PIP's campaign was seen as very disciplined. They stuck to their key messages consistently.
Focused.
Very. And one strategic move people noted was putting DPM Gan Kim Young in the Punggol GRC.
Oh, Punggol. That was seen as potentially competitive, wasn't it?
Exactly. So putting a senior, well-regarded figure there was seen as a move to shore up support, reassure voters, maybe counter any unease about leadership transitions.
The strategic deployment, basically. And did it work?
Analysts seem to think it did, yeah. It likely helped solidify their position there, suggests they were maybe learning from past elections where they didn't do as well in some contested areas.
Interesting. And what about identity politics? Is that much of a factor?
According to PM Wong, not really. He made a point after the election of saying that Singaporeans had largely rejected that kind of politics.
So sticking to the multiracial, multi-religious ideal.
That was the message. That appeals based on race or religion didn't gain much traction.
Okay. So pulling it all together, how does this election result fit into Singapore's bigger picture, dealing with this complex world?
Well, you hear a lot about Singapore needing resilience, needing internal cohesion, needing global connections to thrive in uncertain times.
Right, that's the constant refrain.
And this election result, delivering stability and continuity with a strong mandate, you could argue it reinforces Singapore's position. It projects unity and strength, which might be seen as vital for navigating those global challenges.
Stable ship in stormy seas kind of thing.
Perhaps. And remember, as we said, this was PM Wong's first election as leader.
Yeah, his first big test.
And analysts are generally calling it a very successful first outing for him. He got that clear mandate he asked for.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, the key takeaways seem pretty clear. Yap's big win wasn't down to just one thing.
No, it was a mix. Definitely that desire for stability, fueled by worries about the global situation and, crucially, the economy right here, especially the cost of living.
The flight to safety idea seems central. Trust in the PAP's track record, trust in the new leadership.
Exactly. And on the other side, the Workers' Party held its ground but didn't really expand, while the smaller parties struggled, reinforcing that kind of one-and-a-half-party dynamic we talked about.
Right. So hopefully you, the listener, now have a much clearer sense of the forces shaping this election outcome.
Indeed. And maybe a final thought for you to consider. Given how plugged into the global economy Singapore is, but also facing these really pressing domestic needs like cost of living, what are the biggest long-term challenges for the government now? How do they balance those external pressures and internal priorities?
Yeah, navigating that tension between global realities and local concerns. That seems like the core challenge ahead, something to mull over.
Definitely.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Singapore general election of 2025. We hope it's given you some valuable insights.